Have you ever had a moment where everything in your life looked fine? Your responsibilities are under control, your routines are working, nothing is obviously wrong. And yet, if someone asked where your life was going, you wouldn't know what to say. Maybe the future suddenly feels blank, or the past no longer explains who you are, or the present feels full of activity but strangely directionless. When that happens, people often say we're experiencing a crisis of meaning. You hear it everywhere, that our institutions are unstable, that politics feels fractured, that society has somehow lost its sense of direction. But that diagnosis might be skipping something crucial. Because before we talk about a crisis of meaning, we need to ask a simpler question. What does it actually mean for a life to feel meaningful? In the previous video on identity, we saw that identity isn't something fixed inside of you. It's a trajectory, a braid that holds your life together across time. Meaning turns out to be closely related. Because from a PHET perspective, meaning is not primarily a belief. Meaning is something you experience when your life has orientation across time. A life feels meaningful when three things hold together. Your past makes sense, your present feels coherent, and your future feels possible. Meaning is the feeling that these three strands still form a braid. That your past connects to where you are now, and that where you are now still leads somewhere. When that braid holds, you have a sense of direction. You know where you stand in time. But when one of those strands breaks, meaning begins to disappear. Trauma can destabilize the past, anxiety can overwhelm the present, depression can collapse the future until nothing ahead feels reachable. Meaning isn't abstract philosophy. It's the felt coherence of a life unfolding across time. And if you check in with yourself right now, you might even ask, which strand feels strained? Is it the past, the present, or the future? Now here's something interesting. Humans have always been in the business of expanding what we can integrate across time. Across biology and history, systems that persist tend to expand their capacity to hold difference together. Cells learn to integrate chemistry. Nervous systems learn to integrate signals across time. Human societies learn to integrate memory across generations. And every generation inherits more than the one before it. More knowledge, more encounters with different cultures, more interpretations of the past, more possible futures. So the feeling that the world is becoming complex is not new. People throughout history have worried that the latest change, a new technology, a new idea, a new social movement, might destabilize everything. Yet, human societies rarely collapse simply because they integrate more. Integration is the normal condition of human life. What is new today is the speed, scale, and simultaneity of what we're trying to integrate. Global histories, multiple cultural traditions, rapid technological change, planetary ecological systems. The scope of integration is expanding very quickly, and that creates pressure. But the tension we feel may not come from integration itself. It may come from something else. A mismatch between the complexity we're trying to integrate and the frameworks we use to understand the world. Much of modern knowledge was built on what philosophers call the subject-object paradigm. This framework assumes a detached observer studying stable objects from a distance. And for many scientific problems, this works beautifully. But it struggles when we apply it to systems that are fundamentally relational, historical, interpretive, or interdependent. Systems like identity, culture, institutions, collective memory. This is why so many contemporary debates feel strangely stuck. Why identity discussions feel impossible, why institutions feel rigid or hollow, why people talk past each other even when they're well informed. These are not failures of intelligence. They're signs of a framework being pushed beyond what it was designed to explain. And when the framework reaches its limits, we start to see stress fractures across many different domains. In philosophy and social science, we see debates over standpoint knowledge and objectivity. In biology, researchers struggle to explain how agency emerges in living systems. In physics, quantum measurement raises deep paradoxes about observation. And in artificial intelligence, systems that perform brilliantly in controlled environments often collapse in the open world. At first glance, these problems seem unrelated, but they all point to the same tension. A framework designed to isolate objects is being asked to explain processes of integration across time and relation. When meaning feels unstable, people often respond with nostalgia. They say, "We used to have shared meaning." And that emotional response makes sense. Restricted systems often feel meaningful because they are easier to hold together. But historically, that stability often depends on narrowing the range of difference a society allows. Restricting identities, limiting whose past is remembered, constraining whose future is possible. These systems don't integrate more, they reduce what needs to be integrated. And that reduction can feel like stability, but it comes at a cost. When systems suppress difference, they may appear stable for a time, but they often become brittle. And brittle systems eventually fracture under pressure. From a PHET perspective, meaning does not come from reducing complexity. Meaning emerges when systems can integrate complexity without tearing apart. This is why diversity matters in a much deeper sense than most discussions acknowledge. Diversity isn't just a moral preference, it's a structural condition for meaning. Without diversity, futures shrink. Without new perspectives, the past becomes brittle. Without variation, systems lose direction. When a society expands what it can integrate, more experiences, more histories, more perspectives, it also expands the range of futures it can imagine. And that expansion increases resilience. Across many complex systems, from ecosystems to economies, researchers have discovered the same pattern. Resilient systems succeed not by simplifying the world, but by integrating complexity. This also points to a deeper transformation in how human knowledge works. Different forms of knowledge deal with complexity in different ways. The sciences often reduce complexity to identify stable patterns. The humanities integrate complexity to understand relational systems, cultures, histories, meanings. And societies build institutions to coordinate knowledge across time. As we attempt to integrate more perspectives and more histories, these integrative capacities become increasingly important. Not because the sciences are failing, but because reduction alone cannot organize the complexity of human experience. So perhaps the problem we call a crisis of meaning is not that meaning has disappeared. It may be that the frameworks we inherited are struggling to integrate the complexity we now face. Meaning does not disappear when the world becomes complex. Meaning disappears when integration fails. The real challenge of our time is not to return to older certainties. It is to develop ways of integrating more knowledge, more perspective, and more futures without fracturing the systems that hold our lives together. In the previous video, we saw that identity is the braid of a life across time. Meaning is the direction that braid can take. And the resilience of our societies may ultimately depend on how much difference we can hold together without tearing. The question is not whether the world is becoming more complex. It always has. The question is whether we can expand our capacity to integrate that complexity while continuing to move forward together, because that is where meaning lives. If you'd like to explore how this framework applies to memory, intelligence, and even physics, consider subscribing. I am, therefore I think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.